Hello, my name is Susan and I'm going to be showing you how to make a simple beaded bracelet and then how to make dangles to make your own earrings to go with that fabulous bracelet that you're going to be making. So the first thing we're going to look at is what it takes to put a beaded project together. And so let's take a look at the tools that I have. First of all, I've got this bead mat here. This is just an anti-roll resistant kind of material. So when you dump your beads on it, the beads don't go all over the place. They're going to stay right where you put them. And then just like any new craft, you're going to need the tools it takes to put your craft together. And so that's what I have here. Now with jewelry making, it is all about our pliers. And so the first pair that we've got here is called a chain nose or needle nose plier. It comes to a really nice tight tip. They've got a grip on the inside so they can really become an extension of your hand rather than putting your pinching your fingers into your project and perhaps changing the whole sizing and all of that. We want to avoid that, so we're going to use our chain nose pliers to do any gripping or pinching that needs to be done. Next we have our round nose plier. Now round nose plier has very smooth jaws. You don't get a whole lot of grip out of them, but we are going to make our eyes for our drops and our earrings out of these, so more about those later. And then third, we've got what we call a flush cutter. It's flush on one side and then concave on the other. Again, the point is to be able to get right next to our beads, to be able to cut off tails and things like that without stretching out our project. So flush cutter will do that for us. And then we have a flat nose plier. Now a flat nose plier just has a larger area to grip something with, and so we'd like to have one of these as our left hand to be able to grip things while we're manipulating over here. So we have our flat edged or flathead plier. And then the last one we're going to look at does a couple of looks like it has a couple of weird things happening here on the nose. So what this does, it's called a crimp plier. It's made specifically to manipulate our crimps and make them stay on the wire, which is what makes it stay on the clasp, which is what keeps our bracelet together. So a crimp plier. And you'll see if you push the nose together, you've got two different functions here. So we're going to crimp in one and then crimp in the other, and that's what is really going to give us a good positive hold for our bracelet. And then what else we have going on here, our beading wire or beading cable. Now it looks like hair, it really is as flexible as string, but it's so much stronger. In this case we're using what's called Beadalon Cord. This one says it has 19 strands, which is what we're using for this glass project. What that means to you is that it's got 19 strands of stainless steel that have been twisted together and then coated in nylon. So it's very comfortable to work with. It's also very strong, and that's what's going to keep our bracelet together for many, many years. And then to go with that, we have a clasp. Now, most of you are familiar with lobster claws or spring clasps. That's what's on most manufactured jewelry. We'd like to introduce you to what we call a toggle clasp. It's a two-parter. So we have what's called an arm and a hoop. And the way these work is the arm is going to go up through the hoop and lay, whoops, I kind of have the eye going in the wrong direction. It's going to lay down on top of that hoop and give us a nice close, and then it also adds to the beauty of our piece. This one happens to be a very simple, clean design, but you can get toggles in all kinds of different patterns. Whether you've got a cat that's holding a mouse, or a dog that might be holding a dog, another dog, a dog holding a bone, or it might be a flower or with a vine of leaves. They get really decorative and again can just become another part of your pattern rather than just a way to keep it closed. But you get a really nice positive close out of these guys. They're great for bracelets and necklaces, so they're not just for one thing or the other. And then you'll see I've got all these other metal fiddly bits going on my beading mat here. So we've got these little round circles. This is a circle of wire. We call them jump rings. There's a cut in it, so we can add something to it and add this to something else, and it has just become a connector. So more about those later once we get to our finished bracelet. And then we have what's called a crimp tube. Crimp tubes are just a malleable metal that allows us to change the shape of it and make it grab hold of our wire. This is probably the most important piece of anything you put together, whether it's a bracelet or a necklace. It's what is going to keep the wire attached to the clasp and keeps our piece hanging together. So crimp tubes, and then we have what's called a crimp cover. Once we manipulate our crimp tube, it's not very attractive, and so we put it inside a crimp cover. We're going to close it up. It turns into just a little round bead at the end of our project, and it's just more attractive than leaving that crimp as just a smooshed up piece of metal. And then we have what we call head pins over here. Head pins are just a already hardened piece of metal that has a stopper on it. So actually a head pin is kind of misnamed because that head ends up on the bottom. That's what stops our beads from falling off and allows us to make dangles and things like that. They get really decorative. These ones just happen to have a flat head, but you can certainly get ones that have a little round ball on the end. They might have what's called a bally bead, so a bead that just has more going on than just smooth sides. It might have a crystal on the end. You can get them in all different types of lengths, anywhere from like 3/4 of an inch all the way up to 4 inches. So if you like a dangle that whacks you in the shoulder every time you wear them, then you're going to want to head for a larger head pin than what we've got here. This is just your standard 2-inch head pin. And then these two are just samples of spacer beads. Spacer beads are just a metal bead that you can put in between your glass beads, and it gives them more prominence. It can add some beauty to your piece. You can use them or not. It's totally up to you. I like to put them in between beads to give it a little bit more flexibility and maybe some more interest. And then ear wires. Ear wires, again, come in a million different shapes and sizes and tones, just like our head pins do. These ones just happen to be a simple design with an eye and a ball with a spring, and we'll show you how to manipulate those to make earrings with them. And then, of course, I've got my beads. I just have some 10mm faceted rounds, is what we call a round bead with cuts in it. The facets are what gives it all that pretty sparkle, and because you can't have too much sparkle, then I've also got some crystal rondelles. A crystal rondelle is just a rondelle shape. That's what this flattened round is, and it's been studded in crystals, so I'm going to get some really nice bling going on my bracelet. So to get us started then, let's go ahead and pick up our cable. Now I didn't mention, cable comes in several different strengths. We're using this 19 strand Beadalon as the strength today. It's kind of a bit of an overkill. You can easily get away with a 7 strand cable. I'm using the 19 strand just because it's right there in the middle and kind of gives us an idea of how beading cable behaves. But this one's 19. You can also get it in a 49 strand. 49 strand I would normally only reach for if I'm doing something like a beaded curtain, or maybe something that like a chandelier that's going to have large pieces of crystal on it, something that's going to get really heavy and needs to have that extra strength. It's also great for outdoor wind chimes because it's been coated in nylon. You're not going to get rust, and so it gives you some really great strength if it's outside in the wind, and gives you a chance to enjoy that type of project for many, many years without it falling apart. So beading cable, again, we're using 19 strand. We definitely could have used 7, but we're using 19 today. And so the first and last bead of every project, whether you're making a bracelet or a necklace, you always start and end with our crimp tubes. So I'm going to pick one of those up. And usually it's easier for really small pieces to leave them on your mat and then use your cable as a needle to find the hole and pick them up. So that's what I did just there. I just looked for the hole and picked up my crimp tube that way. So I've got my crimp tube on. Then I'm going to reach for the arm of my toggle clasp and thread my cable through that eye. Just bend that cable over and push your crimp tube right over that tail that you just made. Now you want to leave about a 1.5 to 2-inch tail. We're going to bury that in beads so we won't see it, but it does give it extra strength. If something should happen to my crimp tube, say 5 years down the road, it decides to weaken, it's going to have a much more difficult time losing all of my beads than if I had not left a tail on here and cut it right off at the crimp. So I'm going to leave that on there and then just cover it up with beads. So with my crimp, I want to push that up as close as I can to the eye of our toggle arm, but I still want movement. It has to be able to move to be able to get up into the hoop. So I'm going to make sure it still wiggles. Yep. And now I can reach for my crimp plier and go ahead and make that first smush. When I mean smush, I'm pushing my pliers together and making them do something. So in this case, I'm going to put my crimp tube right into the center notch and then give it a really good squeeze. You're not going to break the pliers, so make sure you're putting some strength behind it. And now I've got that. I take it off the plier and you can see I've got just a really nice, can we see that? It's got a really nice crease right down the center of it. So that just changed the shape of my crimp, and I'm going to do it again by moving my crimp up and then putting it back into the first notch of that crimp plier and smushing it again. Now when you're done, it should look like a miniature hot dog bun. You have now divided it or flattened that tube, and now we've pressed it into half its size. It's made it really strong. It's got a really good grip. I'm just going to give that just a little bit more tweak to make sure it's nice and tight. And then I'm going to test it. You test every crimp, whether this is the first one you've done or you're at the 1,000th one you've done. You want to make sure that crimp holds before you go on. If for some reason it does not, it's just a piece of metal and it can fail. So we're going to test it. I'm going to hold it by the arm and then hold it by the wire and give it a good tug. If it holds, we're golden. We can move on. If it would have slipped and given me some slide, I would have taken that crimp off and put a new one on. You don't want to try to continue to manipulate this crimp tube to make it stay on if there was slip, because every time you press metal, it hardens it, and you don't want it to get to the point where it's so hard that it cracks and breaks off. Then you're losing your possibly all your beads, your cable, and your crimp. Instead, catch the problem now before you go any further. So there we go. I've just given it a few good tugs. I know I've got a good stay. So now, after all that work of getting that crimp on there, I'm going to cover it up. And that's what our crimp covers come in. So I'm just going to lay my crimp right into that crimp cover, and then I'll stabilize it here so I can manipulate that. And you can see that crimp is right inside the crimp cover. I'm going to grab my chain nose plier, the one with the grip on the inside, and I'm just going to come at that crimp cover on the sides and then lightly tap it closed. Let me get it back over the crimp there. So there we go. So now I'm just going to close that up. Now this is a pretty soft metal, so it doesn't take a lot of strength. And there we go. So I've just closed it up. Now when it closes, it turns into a little circle. But you can see you've still got kind of ridges right here on the top. So I'm going to come at it from the side and the top and bottom, and just straighten that out a little bit, and then re-close it a little bit tighter. And it does turn into a little ball then at the end of your project, rather than having that smushed up crimp tube. It looks more professional, it'll feel soft when you're wearing it, and so it just gives it a more finished look. So now that I've got that on there, I can go ahead and decide how I'm going to put my beads on my cable. Now that's totally up to you. You can go completely random, you can create patterns, you can do whatever you want to do and what's pleasing to your eye. I happen to like things in odd numbers. I'm either going to do 1s or 3s or 5s, but I like the look of odd numbers over even. So that's normally how I put things together. Now, we chose the arm end first because that's the side we need to think about when we are putting our beads on our wire. This arm has to go back up through the hoop to be able to give it a good positive connection and lay down. So you can see that when you add that through, it's also going to pick up enough space here that the first bead has to fit through as well. So I'm going to make sure I'm going to use the smallest bead possible to be able to get it up through that hoop end. In this case, I'm using all of the same size beads, and I've got some pretty big rondelles here as well. So I'm going to use one of my spacer beads to go next, and that'll give me that extra space I need to be able to put the arm through the hoop and be able to wear my bracelet. So I'm going to go ahead and pick up one of these small spacers, and let me see if I can find the eye. Often the hardest part in small beads is having them not roll away from you while you're digging out the eye. And there we go. So there I go. I've got my small bead on first, and I'm going to feed that over the tail. And then I'm going to continue to cover up that tail as I go so it doesn't reach out and poke me as I'm wearing my bracelet. And then to just give it a little bit more interest, I'll go ahead and add another spacer bead. This one is called a daisy spacer. Kind of looks like a little flower, but the only part that you're going to be able to see once you have it threaded on are the ridges around the edge. And so that just gives it a little bit more interest there on the end. And so let's go ahead and get that one on. And now I can start with how I want my bracelet to look. So I'm going to go ahead and feed on one of my glass beads. These are just glass fire polish beads. The cuts on the bead is what gives it that really pretty sparkle. And then with fire polish, that means that they've been warmed up and all of those cuts have been softened. So very soft to wear and comfortable for you. So there we go. I've got my first one on, and I'm continuing to cover up that tail. So now I'm going to go with something sparkly and put a rondelle on. And now I'll just mix things up a little bit and get 3 beads on in a row. Again, because I like the looks of a odd number of beads rather than an even number. And there we go. We've got that tail covered up. You can't see it's there, but it sure is giving us some more strength to our bracelet. And now let's go ahead and do another crystal rondelle. And then 3 more beads. I am so pattern oriented, I can't make myself do anything random. Kudos to anyone who can. But I have a tendency of finding a pattern in everything. So we're just continuing to put beads on until it's at the length you want it to be. Now, I could have measured my wrist first. In this case, I've know that my wrist is an 8-inch wrist, so I've cut my cable to 12 inches long. That gives me enough room to create my tails and still some room to play with. Cable is not so expensive that you need to cut it exactly to the length that you need it. You need to give yourself that extra inch or so just to make it easier to finish. Okay, so I've added my last bead here. I'm going to give it a try and make sure that, yep, I'm at the correct length. And you can see that I am. I do need to leave myself a little bit of extra space because the hoop is going to add some length. Once it gets, the bar comes through, you can see it's going to add like another 1/2 inch to 3/4 inch there. And so I don't want it to be at the exact length now. I need to give myself a little extra space. So there we go. I've done that. And so let's finish this end to make it match the other. So here's my daisy spacer and my small round. And there we go. So we've got the round on there. And just like the beginning, my last bead is going to be a crimp tube. So we'll put that on. And then I'm going to go through the eye of my hoop end. So I'll just thread through it. And then I'm going to let that dangle down here while I thread this wire back through the crimp tube and then back through that bead and the daisy spacer. And then I'm going to, if I pinch my wires together, I can just feed that right through, which is why we left that hoop end down here. So I'm going to pinch again and go through a couple more beads just to give a tail on this end. And there we go, I've grabbed it. And so I'm down about 1.5 inches of beads on this side, so I can go ahead and pull on that tail, and you can see it just pulls everything up nice and tight and gets rid of all that excess space. And so just like we did on this end, we want the crimp tube to be close to the eye but not right on top of it. You want to leave some space there so this end will move as well and move freely. We again need to put this end up through that one, and so you want to make sure you've got the wiggle room to be able to do that. So here we go. I'm going to go ahead and crimp this end. So I've got my crimp plier, and I'm going to give it a smush right in that middle notch, and then turn around and smush it flat with that one next to the nose. And I normally 2-fist this end. I want to make sure I'm getting a really tight grip on that cable. And then let's test the whole thing. So now I'm going to grab it by the hoop and by the arm and give it a good tug again. And yep, we've got good hold, so we can go ahead and put our crimp cover on. Now, crimp covers really don't add any strength to your piece. It really is cosmetic. But what you can use it for, say I was out of silver crimps and I only had gold ones in stock at the moment. So I can go ahead and use my gold crimp and then just cover it with my silver crimp tube or crimp cover, and no one will know that I have a gold piece under there that's kind of clashing with everything else. So crimp covers are kind of nice that way as well, that they can cover up something for you. And just a nice soft smush on this. And again, I'm just going to smooth out that top where those two sides came together. they're not right next to each other. They've still got a bit of a seam, so I'm going to soften that up a little bit. I'm just going like this with my pliers, just a nice soft smush. And that just taps down that where those two sides came together and it wasn't exactly soft and round. So there we go. I've got that nice. And then I'm going to run my fingers through it. Let's make sure that's going to be soft and comfortable to wear. And it is. So we're good to go there. Now we've got the tail to deal with. So this is where your flush cutter comes in. So I'm going to put that flat side next to my beads so I can push down with my cutter against the beads, and I'm going to pull on the wire. I want to get every little bit of stretch out of this cable before I cut it off. And then I can go ahead and clip, and now that little bit of stretch has just popped up under that last bead. You can't see it, you can't feel it. It's all nice and soft and comfortable. So now that we have this completed, we want to jazz it up a little bit. So let's go ahead and put a just a little charm on the bracelet, and then maybe we can go ahead and put a bead on there as well, kind of jazz it up and give it some more interest. So to do that, we need a jump ring. I was reaching for the wrong thing there. We need a jump ring. So with jump rings, they are just that round circle of wire with a cut. And if you can't see the cut, then give it a feel. It'll feel rough where it's at. And to open and close a jump ring, you're going to need 2 pliers. You need your flathead plier. That's going to be the biggest grip on the wall of your jump ring. And then you'll use your chain nose plier for the other wall. Now I've got that cut facing the ceiling, and so when I open it, I know where it's going to be opening, and I'm not going to be causing too much harm to my jump ring and weakening it. So I'm going to just put my chain nose plier. It's the only part that's going to move. This one will stay stationary. So I'm just going to tip that jump ring open. And now I've got a good enough size gap. I can go ahead and add the charm. And then I'm going to go through the eye of my hoop end. Now I'm using the hoop end rather than the bar, because remember, the bar has to go up through the hoop, and you don't want to put anything on here that's going to obstruct it going through the hoop end. So I'm going to put that little charm on the end of, or out through the eye of my hoop end, and then I'm going to close my jump ring. Now 2 things should happen when you close a jump ring. First of all, you should hear a snap. You want to know that those 2 ends are coming together, and not leaving any kind of a gap to allow it to open. And then it should also feel rough. Those ends have not been smooth, and so you should get both. So let's listen for the snap. And I didn't hear it. So I'm going to reopen it and just push in slightly while I close it again. And there we go. That time I heard the snap, so I know I've got a good positive close. I'm going to leave it on my flathead plier and lay that jump ring right into my chain nose and give it a good squeeze. I'm going to go ahead and move that jump ring around a little bit. What I'm doing by squeezing on that jump ring is re-hardening the jump ring and making it want to stay closed. If you don't re-harden it and you catch your charm on something, it might reopen that jump ring, and now you've lost that really fun little charm that you just put on. Now, if you also like the looks of a beaded bauble on your bracelet, or you just want more going on there at the end, then we're going to use a head pin for that. Now, it's the same technique to put a bauble on the end of your bracelet as it is to make earrings, so we're going to do this a couple of times. I'm going to reach for my head pin and go ahead and put a bead on the head pin, and then I might as well add a little bit of interest by putting a daisy spacer on there. And then I'm going to make an eye, and that's what these little round circles are. So you can see I've got way more wire than what it's going to take to make this small of an eye. And you really don't want that eye to be bigger than what you've already got here at the end of your toggle clasp. So I'm going to cut off the excess. I'm going to rest my bead on my finger and then push down on the beads, and then I measure where I cut it off on my finger. It's pretty much just the width of my finger. And then I'm going to cut it off with my flush cutter. Now, when you cut it off, this is already hardened with jump rings, with head pins. And so when you cut it off, it's going to fly. I normally have a cat or a dog or something that's helping me bead. And so you don't want to take their eyes out or yours. So you always want to point your head pin down into your beading mat or onto the floor, but you sure don't want to just hang it out there and have it flip and fly, and now you're compromising somebody's health. So don't do that. Tap it right down into your bead mat. So here I am a finger width away, and I'm just going to go ahead and cut that off. My excess stays right there, so I'm practicing safe beading. Now I'm going to grab my round nose plier, and this is what is going to make the eye, to make this bauble stay on my bracelet. So I'm going to grab that head pin, put it right into the center of the jaw, and then give it a feel. You want to make sure you can't feel any of that head pin sticking up out of the jaws, or that part of the head pin will stay straight instead of making that really nice round circle that we want to see. So nothing is sticking out. So I'm going to go ahead and make the eye. I'm going to turn my pliers, and then because I can't go all the way around, I'm just going to open the jaw and reposition on the top of that curve I just created, and then twist my pliers again. You'll feel when the wire comes around and hits the stem of your head pin. So when it does, you've gone far enough. If you take it off your plier, you're going to see that you've got your eye, but it's heading in the wrong direction. It's not right on top of your beads like you want it to be. It's kind of going off to the side. So I'm going to put it back onto my round nose plier and just push it up. And then I'm going to put my thumbnail right here at the back on the stem itself, and that's going to give resistance when I tip this eye back against my thumbnail, and now it just repositioned the eye, so now it's up and down on top of my bead instead of going off to the side. So now to add this to my bracelet, so I'm going to treat this like a jump ring. I'm going to grab my chain nose plier, and I'm just going to lift the tail of my eye, open that up just a little bit so I can put this onto the eye of my toggle clasp as well. And then I'm going to go ahead and close that eye. Again, I've got my chain nose here. Close that eye and then come in and smush again. You really want to make sure you've hardened this metal back into that shape so it won't want to pull apart should it get caught on something. And so there we go. Now we've got this really lovely dangle at the end of our bracelet. It has so much more personality with dangles hanging off, and it'll just make it funner to wear. So normally when you're making bracelets, you always want to have that clasp be in the back or on the underside of your wrist. And in this case, we have made a bracelet that you can go ahead and let the back side be on the top of your wrist instead. Between the toggle clasp and the dangles, it's just more attractive. Well, gosh, my fingers aren't cooperating. Usually the arm just pokes up through the hoop, and there we go. Now I can grab it on that side and pull it up and through. And you see how that's not now laying nicely down. But if my bracelet should move around, now it's on the top of my wrist rather than underneath, it's still attractive. That's still something pretty to see, as well as my blinged out faceted glass. I make mine a little bit large. I like bracelets to sit up higher on my wrist, so that's the way I measure them for me. If you like your bracelet to be a bit tighter and just rest here, well then just account for that. I gave myself extra room so I can now roll it up and type or write, and it's not right there resting on the counter. So that's just me. Again, how you fit things to you. That really is the pleasure of making your own stuff, is that when you make it, it's going to fit the way you want it to, not the way that perhaps manufactured jewelry. You know, we're not all the exact same 9-inch wrist. As I said, mine's an 8, so anything that I purchase, I end up having to tear it apart, remake it so it doesn't fall off my hands. So there we go. That's how to make a bracelet. If you're going to make a necklace, really it's exactly the same thing. You're just making it longer. So if you wanted to make a 16-inch necklace so it fits up nice tight against your neck, cut your cable to 20 inches. You always want to add that 4 inches for the tails underneath. You will always start and end with a crimp tube, just like we did in this project. That was that tiny little guy right there. He really is the one that you need to make sure that you are starting and ending every project with, and that's how you make it stay together. Okay, so now that we have our bracelet, let's make a pair of earrings to match. So we're going to come back to our head pin, and we will put our bead on the head pin. In this case, we're just going to make little short guys, so I'll go ahead and put my crystal rondelle on there, maybe add a little round spacer or two just to give it a little bit more interest. There we go. And then that's going to be my earring. So since we need two, let's go ahead and get the beads on the next one. And here's my crystal rondelle and my spacer. And there we go. So now I'm ready to cut off the excess and get these dangles onto my ear wires. So to do that, same process. I'm going to rest my beads on my finger, press them down with my thumb. So I'm making sure I'm not going to have any extra space on my head pin. I'm grabbing my flush cutter, and I'm sure where I'm going to cut. So I'm going to point that down into my bead mat and cut off that excess. And then I'm going to grab my round nose plier, and we will go ahead and create another eye. So I'm placing that pin in the jaws, giving it a feel, still nice and smooth, so I can go ahead and create the eye. I'm going to twist and then reposition that plier on the top of that curve, and then twist again until it comes down and hits the stem, and then tip that eye back against my thumbnail. Now when you do that, it does normally open it up slightly. If it doesn't, we're going to open it up anyway with our chain nose plier. So here we go. I'm going to grab that end, or just the little tail of the eye, just as I would a jump ring, and then grab my ear wire and fit that on, and then close that right back up with my chain nose plier, and then I'm going to give it a smush. Let's harden that, so if it gets caught in my hair or something, it doesn't want to reopen and make me lose my dangle. And there we go. We've got that one finished, and so we'll go ahead and create the other. So I'm going to measure that against my finger. I'm pressing down against the beads, and let's go ahead and cut this guy off. There we go, and right into the bead mat. And then my round nose plier, And again, I'm going to give it a feel. Now, when I first started, I put a black marker on my on the round nose plier itself with just a magic marker. So I would put the head pin in the same place every single time. There's a real relationship between how much you have left after you've cut it off and where you put it on your pliers. If I put my head pin all the way here at the tip of my pliers, I'm going to make a much smaller eye, and I don't need as much wire. If I'm all the way up here because I want a really big eye, well, then I'm going to need some more wire than what I've cut here. So putting a marker on your pliers when you're first starting out, just to remind you where to put it every time. You want your eyes to be even, or the dangles will end up being uneven. You'll have one that rests lower than the other, and you'll be able to see that when you're actually wearing them. So a marker is a quick fix on how to stop that from happening. Alrighty, so I'm going to go ahead and create this eye, do my twist. I'm going to reposition up in that curve and twist again, and then tip back against my nail. And now I've got that second eye completed. I can go ahead and open this eye up and thread on my ear wire. Whoops. Stay on. And then close it up and give it a smush. Now, if you like to have more movement in your earrings, what we could have done here is add a jump ring. It's like adding an elbow or a joint into your earrings or into your dangles. And so you can see if I open this back up, then I can go ahead and add my jump ring. Let me re-smush that. Now I'm going to open up my jump ring. So my two pliers, my flathead, and my chain nose. And I'm just going to open that up. Again, just one side moves. Now I can put my ear wire on and close that up. Let's listen. There's the snap. I'm going to go ahead and give it the smush. And there we go. So not only does it add length, and it sure does, you just added that 6 millimeters of space to it, but you've also added much more movement. And so you can do this same thing, perhaps put 3 dangles together, and just give you more going on around here than just one simple dangle. But that will sure get you started on making earrings. And just how quick and easy that is to do. We call earrings instant satisfaction because you can make them and put them on in like 5 minutes and you're done. So they're awesome that way. Now, if you're not getting the gist of how to use a round nose, or you want to make 1,000 earrings and become the next millionaire on, I don't know, wherever you're going to sell them, then there's a tool called a looper. Now, a looper is going to make that eye for you. You're going to find in beading that you don't always have to reinvent the wheel. If you want to do something, somebody has come up with a tool to make it easier for you. And in this case, it's called the looper. There are 3 different sizes. I happen to have the one that makes a 1.5 millimeter eye. And so to use this guy, rather than your round nose, we would go ahead and pick up our bead, just like we made our other pair of earrings, and then my rondelle, and we might as well pick up a spacer to go with it. And there we go. So with this, rather than now measuring how much I need to cut off and then grabbing my round nose, instead I'm just going to grab the looper. It's going to cut off the excess for me and create the eye. So with this guy, you'll see you've got a bar right here. That's what's going to create the eye. And then you've got a hole on this side. That's where your head pin is going to come out. So it will be able to get that eye right down on your beads. So I'm going to go under the bar and then out the hole on the side. And I have pretty small hands, so I kind of need to hold my beads in place until the plier takes it. Now you can feel it grip as soon as you start to squeeze. This part comes down, grabs hold of the head pin, and keeps it in place for you. So once the plier has grabbed your head pin, then let go and let it do the work. So I'm going to go ahead and squeeze. And do you see how that it's reshaping my head pin around that center bar? Squeeze all the way closed, open it up, and now it has cut off my excess for me and created the eye. It is so easy and fast. So no more measuring, where am I going to cut it off, and then this is what I need, where do I put it on my pliers? Again, the looper. Such a quick and easy tool to use. There is some cost differences in tools. This 3-piece color-coded set, it comes in a package altogether and costs about $14. A crimp plier costs $13, $14 by itself. All of these tools, though, you're going to have for life, that they just don't wear out. If you want to add to your toolbox, you certainly will. I know I like to have a couple of chain nose handy. I like to have a couple of different sizes of the flat nose handy. And then I do keep 2 separate cutters, and I'll tell you why. If you have just a regular side cutter, these are great for your cable, whether you're going from the 7-strand, the 19 that we use today, or all the way up to a 49. Flush cutter's going to have no problem cutting that. That's what they're made for. It's also great to cut our head pins. Even though this is a already hardened wire, it's still soft enough that your head pin is, or that your flush cutters are not going to have a problem cutting it. But if you get in to start using chain, I like to put chain in between my bobble and my head pin. And so most chains are made with just a lightweight malleable metal as well. But if you get something like stainless steel, they are not made for stainless steel, and you can easily put a notch into the jaw, or at the least you're going to dull them by cutting a stainless steel with these kind of a plier. So instead I've got a heavy duty plier that's going to handle that kind of job, and then my lightweight flush cutters for every other job. So that's how we make a bracelet. How we can make earrings, whether you like them just standard like this, or you want the extra wobble by putting in the jump ring or an elbow joint kind of thing in between. Both of those will give you a great set of earrings to match your bracelet. And there you go. You have completed your project. You get to wear it right away. There's no curing or sitting around. The hardest part is deciding what beads you want to make your bracelet out of. And there you go. Thanks so much for watching. Many good projects, I hope, are in your future. I know they sure are in mine. Have a great day.